Well, hello, welcome back, everyone. So, in this video, I'm trying to be more regular about making videos, but it's just so hard, for somebody who can't find employment and hasn't been employed for a while. It's I seem to be very, very, very busy with very jam-packed schedule. Don't know why or how that works, but hey. So I wanted to talk about corporations this time. Again, something that's been on my mind and, to produce a video. So a lot of this is going to have to do with free market, the concepts of free market capitalism and crony capitalism. So one of the thoughts that have been going through my mind is a lot of the times when I talk to right-leaning people, They say that they're free market capitalism, but a lot of the times what they end up describing to me sounds a lot more like crony capitalism. And the fact of the matter is if we live in free market capitalism, that means that there's room for economic mobility. There isn't in crony capitalism. The weird thing to me is when the right starts trying to do everything to defend a very small percentage of very wealthy elite people that they are not a part of at all. And it's like, did they do a really, really bang-up job or a really stellar job of manipulating and brainwashing all these people with propaganda to try and truly convince them that if these fat cat tycoon billionaires, and even centibillionaires now, we have centibillionaires now, if they become richer, that will ultimately benefit their life. And it seems to not work. And it's interesting because the deregulation of corporations always comes in the argument or the form of free market capitalism and little government. But it seems like the more and more we do that, the more and more power we give to these multi-conglomerate corporations. So I would say that it would seem in this country at the time being, if you're a rich billionaire, then you truly do live in a free country. But if you're a normal, average, everyday citizen, you don't live in a free country. The corporations have been given permissions to basically ignore and deny the ADA. And there's also been red tape put up by the federal government in the name of small government and free market capitalism to keep you from suing the companies or holding them liable or accountable for things that they've done, like discrimination based on disability, discrimination based on sexual orientation, which many right-leaning people probably don't care about that. But the fact that you can't hold a company liable or accountable for anything at all, and that it's and when you sue a company based on these premises, it's not something you do for the money. It's something you do for precedence. You won't make any money off of it. So I've talked to many lawyers and people who work for the states, for the state about these things. And it's almost like, and I didn't name any political party. I left that vague and ambiguous for a reason. But when it comes to things like SSI, SSDI, food stamps, Medicaid, Medicare, the argument that's usually given, that this list of arguments is, for one, everyone who's on it is lazy and just doesn't want to work. Which isn't true. Not everyone that's on it is lazy and just doesn't want to work. There are some, and what I find ironic about this, deeply ironic, is that if you call the SSA number to apply for SSI, SSDI, food stamps, and etc., the very first option available on the teleprompt, or not teleprompt, my bad, the prompts on the phone is to report people who are abusing or committing fraud on SSI or SSDI. That's the very first prompt that you're given, is to report somebody for fraud. But instead of holding individuals accountable for their individual actions, what's occurred instead is that we're holding everybody collectively accountable and making it just sheerly impossible for anyone to even get it at all. And so I find it strange when someone says to me that, well, considering your condition, you should qualify. Well, I don't qualify because of the arguments that these people have been giving for many, many years. And another argument that's given is we don't want our taxpayer dollars to go to that. This is where it ties into corporations. My question is, what would you rather, because the government's collecting taxes no matter what. They're still collecting taxes even though they've cut the funding to many of our public programs and social safety nets. They've been cutting. And yet they're still collecting taxes. And it doesn't matter if it's a Republican or a Democrat president. They still do this. So where are your taxes going? Well, I happen to know that about 70% of our tax revenue goes to the military-industrial complex. 70%. Almost 3/4. So, I mean, I would like, and the other thing that you look at is these bailouts, which corporations seem to have a big power grab on this. You have companies like Philip Morris that literally got in one pen stroke, this is just one payment, because people are vaping. They saw a decrease in sales and transactions of cigarette smokers, and they were upset about it. So the government gave them a $500 million paycheck. What would you rather your tax dollars go to? A bank like Citibank that wrote into a House bill that was already on the floor, where if it was already the way that it was made, if the Senate didn't sign it, the government would have to shut down? Citibank brought their lawyers in and lobbyists, wrote a piece of legislation into that House bill that if they don't sign it, they have to close the government down. But in that House bill, they put in a piece of legislation making it so that if they didn't sign the bill, or when they signed the bill, it would repeal the Dodd-Frank Act, making it so that us, the taxpayers, will have to bail out the banks if they go bankrupt again. This is now a legal precedent because of Citibank's lawyers and lobbyists. So I would ask you, what would you rather your tax dollars go to? Paying somebody with a disability to be able to very, very, meagerly skate by. The disability is based off of your income. SSI really isn't. It's loosely based off of it. I think if you retire, but if you don't retire, it's only a whopping like $780 a month. You think you could survive off of $780 a month? And Chickmick, you live in the Appalachians. You don't count. We live in big cities, okay? We live in major cities. $780 a month does not go very far in the city at all. It's a joke. I guess the equivalent would be giving you $1 every month, saying you have to live off of $1 and nothing else. It doesn't work. But on disability, it's a little different because that is SSI is sort of welfare, and SSDI, well, that's disability. It's not your fault you became disabled. Mine's from working too hard and breaking my body. That's not genetic. That's something that happened. And so that's roughly based off of your income. Based off of the income that I've made in my lifetime, if I were to actually get SSDI, well, it would roughly be about $1,300 a month. I can make that work. But I don't get it. I've been denied multiple times because of my age and because I've tried to survive and had a job within the past 12 months, which is the reasons they've given me. I talked to a disability lawyer, and he said, well, I can't represent your case because I basically have to prove to a judge that you can't sell tickets out of a ticket booth. Which I can. I could sell tickets out of a ticket booth. The problem is that job code doesn't exist. And the job coaches that talk to the judges, they're incentivized to deny people disability income. So every time they get a case turned over, they get a good pat on the back, a raise, and the prospect of running for district attorney or something like that. I also have a friend who has heart failure conditions, neuropathy in his brain, and seizures, and also has a brachial plexus injury of his own where his nerve has been severed because somebody stabbed him in the shoulder. He lives with his mother, and she is an RN. She makes $35,000 a year, and they are living in her mom's or his grandmother's house. I don't know if that's rented or if she owns it. It's quite possible she's owned it. It's paid off. It's quite possible that they're renting the house. But he was denied disability because his mom that he lives with, and this is a person who has a biochemistry degree as well as a degree in mortuary science. He was denied disability because his mother, who's an RN, makes $35,000 a year, taking care of both her son, who is extremely disabled, and his grandmother, who is extremely disabled due to age. So I don't know how that calculates or adds up. A big argument that's given to me by the Conservative Party or the conservative people is that when you are disabled, they expect that your friends, family, community take care of you and sort of live in this fantasy bubble that we all live in these small towns and villages. And then simultaneously say that we need the population to expand, especially amongst white people. And that just doesn't make sense, okay? I live in a city of 4.5 million people. How do you make a small town or a small village where everyone knows each other to come together and take care of each other when somebody does become disabled with 4.5 million people? And then on top of that say, we need that population to grow. To me, that's brain-dead nonsense. That tells me you don't possess basic math skills. But aside from that, I would ask, do you want your taxpayer dollars to go to a company like Philip Morris or Walmart or Citibank or Wells Fargo, who have more money than you could ever even possibly imagine, that live in a social class that is far beyond your own reach, that for some reason you go completely out of your way to defend? And I'll never understand why. They say that it trickles down, but all that trickles down is the major conglomerate corporations or the fat cats, tycoons, and billionaires that sit at the top. The only thing that really seems to trickle down is shit in your face. And many of us down here, the rest of us that are down here at the bottom, well, we're just tired of getting shit in our face. It feels like it's merely a hairline fracture away from feudalism and being serfs. Okay. So would you rather your tax dollars go to those companies where literally if they got my condition, they could stop working and they wouldn't even have to worry about having a 401k because they literally just have that much money? They wouldn't need to worry about it. They're set for the rest of their life, 401k or not. That's how much money they have. Which you defend because free market capitalism and limited government. Okay. You know, I like small. I don't like government at all. But you know, when when a group of 1% is taking advantage of the system to this way, where they're the only ones that are being represented in Congress, and we are not. Yeah, I do want big government to step in. We need some kind of administration or something to be an arbiter to step in and say, no, you cannot profit off of the dissolution, the destruction of an entire civilization, society, and its people. You can't profit off of that. You can't. And the other aspect of free market that isn't free market is the idea that, well, you know, you let your dollar decide. That if a company is not treating its employees correctly, if it engages in crony capitalism, if it engages in artificial inflation and artificial resource scarcity, or does things like think 200% turnover rate is acceptable, which is pretty much all companies these days. And Walmart is not honest, by the way. They will report a 200% turnover rate, but they do not count people who are part-time, and they also don't count people who have only been there for 6 months. So they lie about their turnover rate. Their turnover rate is actually higher than 200%. And another thing that companies are doing that is an old tradition of Walmart, or something that Walmart's been doing for a long time, is they've been consolidating more and more workload onto fewer and fewer people. So they'll take a job that takes 20 people to do, but they'll try and see if they can get 5 people to do it. And if 5 people can't do it, or they barely, they get it done, but it takes far longer than, let's say they want it done in 2 hours, but it takes 5 days, they will sit there and they will blame the employee, the trainer, the manager over that team, the assistant manager, and the GM. And they'll say, it's your guys' fault, not our system, not us. They'll fire them. That circulates people out of the system, especially people who are capped out in pay, so they can bring new people in and pay them less. And they save money by doing this. So there's the whole, free market capitalism, vote with your dollar. Well, that doesn't work considering there's only 3 beverage companies that you can buy beverages from. I found out that Naked Drink that I was drinking is distributed by Pepsi. The 3 major beverage companies that are the only 3 beverage companies that distribute beverages is Dr. Pepper, Coca-Cola, and Pepsi. Oh, and guess what? These guys talk to each other. Coca-Cola recently, it was published and displayed publicly, became public knowledge, that Coca-Cola decided, since they've plateaued in sales and transactions, they were going to produce an artificial inflation on their products because they wanted to increase their amount of profit by somewhere around $12.9 million or billion dollars. And they were going to blame it on resource scarcity because at the time we had the barges sitting off the coast. So they were going to say, well, it's because of that why, we're having resource issues, and we're going to blame it on that. They called Pepsi up and told them that they were going to do this. And Pepsi goes, well, sure, we could use an extra, $12.9 billion in profits because likewise we've plateaued in sales and transactions, as all soda pop vendors have. And what a great time to do it, because we can blame it on the government. We can blame it on resource scarcity, on the barges sitting off of the coast, and nobody will figure out that, no, we've just increased the prices because we've decided to do that in the name of profit. And so Pepsi will do it too. So it looks like it's resource scarcity, but actually it's the 2 companies working together in artificial resource scarcity and artificial inflation. And then another thing that occurs is Dr. Pepper. This is a weird one. Dr. Pepper is made by Coca-Cola, distributed by Pepsi, but owned by the company that makes 7-Up and Dr. Pepper. So all 3 of these companies are giggling and snickering because they're laying in bed with each other, and they act like Dr. Pepper is almost like a ghost company that isn't really there. It's just owned and operated and sort of manufactured between Coke and Pepsi. So if you wanted to boycott Coca-Cola, the moment you buy a Dr. Pepper, you've not only given money to Coca-Cola, you've given money to Pepsi as well, and you've given money to Dr. Pepper. You can't boycott these companies. It's impossible. We could also look at retail. I've realized this recently when I was buying underwear. I thought, what are my options? My options are Amazon, Target, Walmart, CVS, Walgreens. That's it. Those are my options. All of them, multi-conglomerate, multinational, huge, gigantic corporations that get subsidiaries from the government. Meanwhile, there's people living in tent cities, people with disabilities, people without health care, people who need food stamps, that would be significantly less money than what these companies are demanding in bailout monies, like Philip Morris and their $500 million because people are vaping instead of smoking cigarettes. Philip Morris bought out R.J. Reynolds a while ago, so they profit off of a bunch of different products. They don't just sell cigarettes, they sell a plethora of things. So their lack of cigarette sales means that, well, their cigarette production just goes down. That's all it means. It doesn't mean cigarettes go bye-bye. It just means they don't have to make as much, and it's not a cash product anymore. That's all it means. They're not sinking, but they still got $500 million from the government, comparative to an individual receiving $1,300 a month. How many years would it take me to accumulate up to $500 million at $1,300 a month? I'm not going to do the math right now, but think about that. Suppose I should at some point so I can deliver that to you. But, so which would you rather do? So Walmart gets subsidiaries, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Dr. Pepper gets subsidiaries. They all do. So does Walgreens, CVS. CVS and Walgreens are deeply embedded with government subsidiaries because they run pharmacies out of their retail stores. And same with Walmart now too. Amazon, no. But they get subsidiaries from the government, like they don't have to pay postal tax. Okay, that's interesting. Where was I? Shit. Okay, so those are the top. Those are the only retail: Target, Walmart, Amazon, CVS, and Walgreens. How do you boycott when these companies have pretty much they do not like competition. They have almost established a monopoly. And anytime a small company comes along, they either deliberately push it out of business by putting a Walmart, Walgreens, or whatever right next door to it, or they put it out of business by buying it. Like Amazon. Amazon loves to suck up small mom and pop businesses by saying you'll never be able to compete with us, so you might as well be a third-party vendor and sell your stuff on our site. Well, what you may not know about Amazon is that when you are a third-party vendor selling stuff on their site, you are held to some pretty high standards and demands. And they will dictate to you how you can and will sell stuff on their site and on their platform. So how do you boycott a company that's that big? Where you have no alternative other than another evil, you know. There's no way you can do. You can't boycott them anymore. You can't. So when somebody suggests the government stepping in and breaking up like tech companies and making tech companies like Google or companies that provide internet into like a utility like water and electricity, people say, well, that's big government. But they have almost pretty much a monopoly. Like, you know, there's a South Park joke that talks about the cable company and saying, oh, you have a problem, they're rubbing their nipples, like, oh, that's too bad. Have you thought about going to another company? Oh, darn it, that's right, we're the only one. And that is painfully common, that in the area you live in, there's either one internet and TV provider, or only maybe like 3 or 4. If you happen to live in a city, that you might have a little bit more option there. If you live in a more rural area, you really kind of don't have an option. And I do know that there's a suburb of where I live, the only available option for a while was Comcast. And they did gouge their prices. They gouged the shit out of people. They were charging $120 for basic cable. Why? Because there were no competitors, and any time a competitor tried to go out their way, they'd take them to court. That's not free market. That's crony capitalism. And it's done in the name of limited government. Something to think about. You know, I'm not saying I can't tell you to, you know, oh, you should just become a leftist and be pro big government. Now, I'm not pro big government, but what I am against is these companies running amok the way that they are and taking advantage of the civilians, breaking the society, creating mass poverty, also they can profit and make record profits than they've ever made before because they're plateauing in sales and transactions. So I think it would be interesting if the government did provide a free internet service. I think that would be interesting. But I'm sure someone would say that's big government. And it doesn't negate or mean that you get rid of cable companies or internet companies. It just means if you don't want to pay the ridiculous prices, you could go and get government internet. Sure, it would be shittier and you may not be able to stream something like Netflix or Amazon or something like that, but you might get basic internet access to, government sites, EDU sites, things like that. Which, or do job searches and things that you need the internet for these days because we've become dependent on it. We don't do paperwork anymore. We don't fill out applications. It's all done on the internet. It was a great idea. I'm being sarcastic about that. So, the other thing that companies are, that are problematic in the way that I see it. I was watching a content creator that was, I don't know if this is true or not, but they were talking about how empires, the rise and fall and collapse of empires or governments, societies, institutions, things like that. And they were saying every time a society, a system, a government collapses, it is not the people who have, potentially broke it and overthrown it that get to take over. It's usually the group of people within that society or empire that have the most power and control that reestablish a new system or society or government. And so that means, what that tells me, if that's true, if that is indeed true, it doesn't matter how many January 6s the far right pulls off, if they actually are to succeed and tear down the government as we know it, our constitutional republic and the concept of democracy there within it, you don't get to make the new society because you don't have enough power and authority and control. That wouldn't be a civilian thing. That would be the major conglomerate corporations, the multinational corporations that have been holding our very own established government right now at a bureaucratic gunpoint, saying, if you don't sign these bills, if you don't give us this money, if you don't do these things for us, for these top 1%, then we will pull our resources and watch you collapse. So how does that work? Well, we forget how much power these companies actually have. What do the companies run? Everything. These companies can shut off an entire power grid to an entire state. They have this ability. They could shut off an entire power grid. And you could try to January 6 these people. You could try to January 6 these rich elite people that own these companies, the CEOs, the CFOs. You have to keep in mind these people have so much money. Many of them have nuclear fallout bunkers. You could January 6 them all you want, you won't get anywhere. They're so well protected, the fact that they have nuclear fallout bunkers means you could toss a nuclear bomb at them and they'll still be alive. And all they have to do then at that point is go, oh, if you're not going to play ball, we're not just going to turn off your power grid, we're going to turn off your water supply. And they'll tell you, we're not going to turn it back on until you capitulate to our demands and recognize we are now your new leaders. Now, a lot of the times people talk about totalitarianism, authoritarianism, how they don't want it, we're trying to avoid it, etc., etc. Well, especially from right-wing people, they say they hate communism. I've said for a long time, these big corporations act like communist factions within the United States. They engage in uniformity. They engage in group thinking alike. When you get a job there, they give you a uniform. They say, welcome to the family. You're part of the team now. These companies already act very totalitarian, authoritarian. They monitor your social media because you're not allowed to say anything negative about them. It doesn't matter if you're on the clock or not. You're not allowed to talk negatively about your employer, even though it's really none of their business what you think or say about them, especially when you're off the clock. It doesn't matter. They are concerned, like if you rob a bank and you happen to have your uniform, you're part of the family, the team now. Somehow you're representative of that company, even though you're not on the clock and you're not representing them at all. And if you rob a bank, it doesn't matter that that's your own personal shit. That company then holds that over your head and fires you and terminates you and can hold you liable in all kinds of respects. You sign this agreement when you get hired. Pay attention to what you're signing. A lot of the times nowadays, you even sign a non-disclosure agreement, meaning like, let's say you work in a food factory and there's birds in the warehouse and they're pooping on the trays that they serve the donuts on. You've signed an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, saying that you can't inform your friends and family that not to eat those donuts because right now they currently have a bird problem where the birds are pooping on the trays. You'll get in trouble. You'll get fired. And let's not pretend that money is not equated to the ability to get resources. That's exactly what money and monetary value is. Money and monetary value is the ability to obtain resources that we need to survive: a roof over our head, controlled environment, food, water, electricity, all that good stuff. And they absolutely will dangle your livelihood over your head, which is why a lot of people don't participate in mass walkouts and strikes, is because there's so much at stake. People are afraid of losing their job and losing pretty much everything they have. And becoming one of the members of these tent cities that are located in every major city across the United States, and they are in every major city, whether it's red or blue, doesn't matter. It's across the United States. So, where was I? I was on... So, these companies, the control of resources. So, you could toss a nuclear bomb. They could restrict you from. Oh, that's right. They act like communist factions. I think that's how they would withhold resources from us and try to literally starve us out, like Republicans or the right-leaning people were proclaiming when we had a resource scarcity issue because of the barges sitting off of the coast. No, the companies would literally do it. They would stop all transportation units of transporting goods and services of any kind. And the banks even have the authority to completely shut down your entire bank account and all your savings and money and earnings, everything. So they could do a whopping amount of damage. And until, we were like, okay, you're Lord and Master. Look at how they treat their employees as it is. It's quite clear they don't give a damn about them. I think that they probably would operate within sort of a communist sort of setting of that, they'd provide you with resources. They'd give you food, shelter, water, all that good shit. But you would solely live to serve these corporate empires. So you would have to dedicate basically your sole purpose would be the moment you wake up, take a shower, drink your coffee, and go to these empires and do whatever it is that, whatever labor force they need done to create resources that they're going to sell in exchange for commodity and commerce within the global market. So they could potentially provide all the housing and everything, but you'll have to go and to your local Walmart or report to your local Citibank or report to your local this, that, or whatever. And you have to put in that'll be your sole purpose of existence, is to serve these companies. I could totally see them doing that. I don't know that for sure. I'm not a magic angel baby and I can't predict the future. but that seems to be how they want to operate. I'd think that that's probably somewhat close to what they would do. So you could throw a nuclear bomb at them, you could January 6th them to death. It wouldn't matter. They'd just shut off the electrical grid, shut off your internet, shut off your bank account, take all your money away from you, close down any kind of transportation of food, and cut you off from resources, and say you're either going to capitulate or you're going to starve to death and die. And let's not forget, a lot of these companies own the manufacturing rights to the weaponry and military stuff that the military has. A company developed those things, not the government. So that's scary. That's frightening stuff. So I don't understand why we participate. Like, I think you can be a conservative and be a Republican and still acknowledge that something has to give. Okay, we can't continue doing this. We can't continue saying companies can do whatever they want. Like, for some reason, they should be above the law, that they're incapable of being corrupted. And anything that is said to break up monopolies and break up the power that they have. Like, it would be very easy to create a piece of legislation giving back, like, all the beverages that Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and Dr. Pepper distribute, and breaking them back up into the small companies they used to be, like Monster. Have Monster energy drinks own the rights to their own beverage instead of it being distributed by, I think it's Coca-Cola that does Monster. So that's something that could happen, that the government does have the ability to do, and they've actually been talking about doing it with the tech companies, of breaking them up and saying, you can't own a monopoly, and you have to branch these off into completely separate companies that have nothing to do with you. They can do this, and they've been talking about it actually with tech companies. But I think they should when you realize there's only 3 beverage companies in the United States, I think they should consider doing it to the beverage companies. Because you can't boycott something that's only within 3 companies. And that's your only option, is 3 companies when it comes to beverages. 3 fucking companies. That's it. That's it. That's all you got. Your only options on retail are Walmart, Target, Amazon, CVS, Walgreens. And that's it. That's all you've got. And like I said, the companies have done a bang-up job convincing you that defending this top 1% is within your best interest as a working class little guy. Or for some reason, it's always marketed in the framework of limited government. That's big government. We can't have that. But every time we do that, and every time we cut regulations and stop holding the companies accountable and liable, they seem to collect more power. You can't sue an insurance company anymore because of red tape by the government proceedings on this premise of limited government. Solely based on just the pure basis that it's an insurance company. You can't sue them because it's an insurance company. That's the reason. That doesn't make sense to me, but because being able to sue them, even though they're an insurance company, that's big government. What? And it's also anti-free market somehow, even though it's almost like they're saying, I want free market capitalism, but the system they described to me is that of crony capitalism. And it's like, well, you can't have both. Free market capitalism is not crony capitalism, and if you have free market capitalism, you don't have crony capitalism, and if you have crony capitalism, you don't have free market capitalism. I can tolerate free market capitalism. I can't tolerate crony capitalism. It's a huge power grab that puts power in the hands of a very small group of very powerful, very rich companies and people. And we're not part of that. And these companies don't think that they give a shit about your politics, okay? Coca-Cola will sit there and go, gay pride, and then shove money into Fox news media outlet, which is a multi-conglomerate, huge fucking news media vendor fucking corporation. They're fucking huge. But Coca-Cola will turn around and put ad revenue into Fox. And then turn around and say, we're liberal, yay. They don't care if you're left. They don't care if you're right. They don't care if you're liberal. They don't care if you're conservative, Republican, Democrat, atheist, theist, black, white. They don't give a fuck. They don't give a shit. The only thing that they care about, all you are to them, is meat with eyes. Your farm equipment. Okay? Your farm equipment. And this is what I mean. It only feels like a hairline fracture away from feudalism. It really does. So I personally advocate for mixed economy. I mean, social safety nets, if that's the best we can do, that's the bare minimum, I gotta tell you. That's not even establishing a standard basic living, social safety nets. A social safety net is just it's just a thinly woven piece of shit that does the bare minimum for people with disabilities or people who can't work or something like that. That it's the bare minimum. It's not even establishing a standard basic living. But every time we talk about social safety nets, that's big government. And it's like, I'd really rather my taxes go to public programs like education, schools, roads, foster care. Foster care needs a lot of help. The VA, for war vets, they need to be taken care of. People with disabilities, all that stuff. I would rather it go to those things than go to companies that have so much money that even if they how free market capitalism is supposed to work. If you mismanage your business and it goes under, you file bankruptcy, you go out of business. If another product comes along that's better, well, it doesn't mean that cigarettes have to go away. It just means they're not popular anymore. And it becomes a small fringe thing. But, this comes in and replaces it. That's free market capitalism. It's not, I've lost so much money because nobody is buying cigarettes anymore, and the government goes, okay, here's a check. Because they're not selling cigarettes like they used to. And then because they don't like competition, they've used lobbyists to try and put vaping out of business. That's not free market capitalism. That's not even limited government. That's very big government, and it's crony capitalism. And it's defended by people saying free market capitalism and limited government. So I'm a fan of a mixed economy, which is where the government is involved in economics and moderating it, or, being a moderator for it, because no economic system is perfect. And I don't understand the idea of no liability or accountability, because liability and accountability towards a corporation is somehow not free market and big government or communism or socialism or something. It's big government, I'll give you that, but, well, it's authoritarian to say that murder is wrong and punishable. That's an authoritarian thing. You premeditated murder, it's life in prison. And I'm not a fan of the death penalty. I'm not going to get into that argument. But for good reason, it's life in prison. That's authoritarian. Just because something is authoritarian doesn't mean it's bad. Like, we need some authority to stop the corporations from pretty much taking over our country. And meanwhile, we're fighting this so-called culture war. And there's a class war going on that we're not even aware of. And because we're not aware, and because we're not paying any attention to it at all, that top 1% is winning. And you've got people on the lower end of the economic scale, people like myself that for some reason defend them and give them more power and give them more authority and give them more money under the guise of free market capitalism and limited government, even though what that turns out to be is crony capitalism and big government. I don't care if it's a Republican or a Democrat at this point. We need, somebody like Andrew Jackson, Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine, FDR. We need somebody to dangle their big, fat, hairy balls in the face of Wall Street and the big banks and these big corporations and say, no, you cannot undermine the civilians and break society and break the economy just so you can make a record-breaking profit every single year. Because you've plateaued in sales and transactions, because you've reached the pinnacle of where your company can possibly go. That's not a good reason to do that. That's what I personally advocate for, is breaking up their power. Say, no, you can't do that. You don't own people. You can't test people's excrement when you're a retailer to see what they're consuming when they're not on the clock. It's not your place. It's not your business what they do in their private time. If the government did half the things that these companies are doing, we would, without a doubt, be saying we live in a totalitarian government. Watching our social media, anytime we say something negative, something bad happens, being constantly tested to see what we're consuming when they're not looking, even all the way to hair follicle tests, and now you can even be denied medical treatment over a UA. If they discover that you've consumed an illicit substance, they can deny you medical care. This is true. This is fact. This is something Don't Punish Pain talks about quite a lot, actually. Yeah. That's not cool. That's not okay. LGBT people are not your enemies. The left is not your enemy. Women's rights, equality is not your enemy. What me and my husband do in the bedroom is none of your fucking business and has, frankly, no effect on you. And you know how you know that? You don't even know the last time we did something in the bedroom. You don't even know, because it doesn't have any effect on you at all. And it's none of your goddamn business. And it's not the fucking government's business either. It's not. And actually, I saw that on Marjorie Taylor Greene's Twitter. She posted something about making an act where that she wants the government to go into people's homes and tell them how to parent their kids to avoid trans people from existing. And somebody posted under that, why don't you create a bill, the bill that says keep the government out of my goddamn home act? And it's like, well, that's interesting because the Republican Party was supposed to be an anti-federalist party that was for limited government and not a government that goes into your home and starts telling you what to do with your children. That's interesting. It's supposed to be a limited government, not a government that comes into your home and says you can't be a fucking homosexual. It's like it's none of your fucking business. So, to me, multi-conglomerate corporations, these multinational, very, very rich, very powerful companies, they are the enemy of the people. Regardless if you're on the left, if you're on the right, if you're a Democrat, if you're a Republican, doesn't matter. They are the enemy of the people. And they're destroying our economy, and they're destroying our society, our little civilization we have here. There is very little, if any, economic mobility, and which is not free market capitalism. It's not. That's not free market. Something to think about. So, I want to leave you this message from Marjorie Taylor Greene. After she was told to make a policy of, why don't you make the Get the Government Out of My Fucking Home Act.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Well, that's probably about the extent of my comedic, and I didn't even make that. That's just a meme that was on the internet, so surprise. This is just some food for thought. Think about this stuff. This stuff is really happening. It's out in the open. It's not conspiracy theory. It's not a bunch of what ifs, maybe, baseless accusations. They are doing all of this right out in the open. It's no secret that the government wrote a $500 million check to Philip Morris because their cigarette sales are down because people are vaping, and that they're using lobbyists to try and put vaping out of business because they don't like competition and they want a monopoly. It's not a secret that they bought R.J. Reynolds. It's all public information. So is the fact that Pepsi, Coca-Cola, and Dr. Pepper are the only three beverage vendors, and they're in bed with each other. It's all public information. Yeah. So, something to think about. It's really hard to find meaning and purpose to life when your only objective is to work for a corporation or company you have no aspiration to work for. And we don't live in small little villages and towns anymore, and you're not going to get that when you're talking about increasing population. You're talking about expansion of cities and eventually not even having rural areas and just one big giant fuck ass city. We're at 7 billion people on the planet. 7 billion with a B. Something to think about. So, sorry to my right-leaning friends. This was a very, very big leftist video, but that's love to debate it if you want, because I've got a lot of questions, because there's a lot of shit that does not make any fucking sense. All right, with that, out.